So I'd like to add some commentary with this video. So as you can see, I've picked up a piece of hornbeam, which was a tree we cut down about 3 or 4 years ago. It's dried well and it's ready to be cut. So hornbeam's a great choice for a plane because it's straight, it's square, and it's tough as old boots. So as you can see, I've picked a piece that's nice and quarter sawn. So the first thing we want to do is try and dimension it. Let's cut it down. Let's see what we've got. So we're going to rip it into a more manageable size. I tried to use as much as possible hand tools. I did use the bandsaw in places, but I tried to do it with the handsaw really. Now you can see here I'm picking the type of plane I want to use. Now I've gone for a polishing plane based on the style of James Krenov. Really nice. If you get a chance to read his work, fantastic. A lot of this is based on that. First thing we want to do is to start to flatten our face, side and edge. See what the timber's like underneath. Now it looks lovely and straight grained, but wait till you see the next picture. After planing off a little more and getting down deeper, well, look at those knots. So would you use that for a plane? Well, of course not. So we're back to the drawing board. We've selected the other piece, and here's a little trait actually. You can see as I've cut this and dimensioned it, I'm planing the face, side and edge to stop it and go round. You can see I've put a stop on one side of timber, but also I've used the bird's mouth stop at the other, and I tension that with 2 screws. That wood will not move around while you're planing it, and that really helps just to keep everything nice and straight. While you're planing, you can really concentrate on what you're doing. When you've done your face, side and edge, you're then going to dimension it. So to do that, you'll need a cutter gauge, which is effectively, instead of a marking gauge, it's a piece of iron with a sharp edge on. And if you look on the left hand side of this picture, you can just see, there it is, you can just see that line of the cutting gauge. Now the advantage of that is, as you get near to that line, the edges of the shavings will curl up and you will see your line without having to keep stooping down. You'll get a perfectly accurate dimensioned piece of timber. When we've done that, we've then got to pick the right blade. So I've got a few to choose from here. Old cutters are the best. Pick one from an old wooden plane, nice thick steel, well tempered, and you just want your central stock to be a little wider than the cutter, maybe a 16th, a couple of millimeters, 2 or 3 millimeters is great, and that will allow you to have a little lateral adjustment. Now about 45-degree angle is good for a polishing plane like I'm going to use, but if you really wanted to go for something where you're going to be using gnarly timber, go for a low angle, go even lower, down to 10-15 degrees, or if you want to go for a scraper plane, go 90 degrees, and that will give you like a cabinet scraper sort of feel to it. So here's my pieces. So I've got the back piece there set at 45 degrees. I've got the front piece set at an angle a lot higher, and then we'll have the 2 side cheeks. So it's 4 pieces to the main plane. So obviously where the cap iron is going to go, then the screw, we need to house that in. So you can see I'm setting out there so that when it sits down, you can see it's just beginning to sit down well. And then we've got to make sure that 45 degrees is nice and square and straight. Now here we go. This is the cabinet maker's pyramid. I just want to talk about that for a minute. It's a triangular shape. That will help you make sure you don't muddle your pieces up. As you can see, the grain's very similar. The swirls, which way up is it? Well, if you just draw a triangle over all your pieces, that way you'll be able to find which way is the side, which one's the top, but also you'll be able to keep it together well, and keep it in register. So you can see here is the assembly, and just set the blade a whisper higher. We don't want to have it protruding out when we're doing this setting out, and that's because we were going to, at the end, you'll see we'll plane that base flat and it will just expose the blade where we want it. Now in dimensioning the timber, I ended up having it was a little bit too tight, so instead of having to restart again, I simply got a file in my vise and scraped it down just so I got that nice little bit of wiggle room, so I can tap it to the left, tap it to the right with my hammer when it's working well, and that would be good. So I dimensioned the stock for the pin. We need a pin to hold the wedge, the cap iron and the blade into place. So again, same wood. You could use a different wood, you could use a piece of dowel, but I've gone to use a piece of the hornbeam. I used a lip and spur bit to make the hole. I chose about 7 millimeters, but it depends on the size of your pin. And you can see here, this is one of the cheeks. Notice I've set out the wedge, and then behind that would have been the blade and the cap iron. So I've set the hole for the pin to be just where I want it to be. And then here we go, you can see I've set it out. This time we've used a mortise gauge to set the tenon square, which is the one with the 2 pins, which makes it even. And I'm going to cut the tenon square first. So the cheeks are set to the width of the central pieces. So it sits in there nice and snug. I just allowed about 0.5 millimetre as well, so it just got a little bit of movement. This is the only piece that we won't glue in. So when we're going to round out those square edges with a chisel to make it really nice and round. Then you can see we've made this D shape. The flat will sit against the flat of the cap iron, and then that will just allow the wedge, and it'll allow a little bit of movement. As we drive in that wedge, it will tighten up with it. That's why we don't glue it in. So there it is in the test hole. You can see it's a nice round. I'll take your time with that. It's worth doing well, but you want a little bit of movement so it can wiggle. Now, be careful. As you can see, I was moving it around and I cracked it. So it's always good to make a spare while you're doing this. So if you go to the next slide, you'll see I made a spare, but I didn't use it because instead I decided to widen my tenon a little bit. But again, I made 2 of those just in case the same thing happened again. I had to widen my hole and adjust things. And then you move to making your wedge. So you can see with this wedge, it's nice and slender at the right hand side, which is where it's going to sit underneath that pin that we've just made. But the top's got to be substantial enough that we can tap it with a hammer. Now here we go, the final dry assembly. Everything's in place. You can see I've chamfered the back side of the throat. That's the right hand side in this drawing. But on the left hand side, you can see the blade doesn't stick through, and that's just what we want. It's about 1 millimetre or so underneath the surface. We're ready for gluing. So that's another picture of it already. The gluing bit, just while we're coming to that, it's important to get all your components ready, get everything clean, check for squareness, check for straightness, make sure everything's in register, make sure your cabinet marks are in the right place. And then with all your clamps ready, your pieces, spare waste pieces at each side, you're ready to glue up. Don't overly glue it. You want enough glue to hold it in, but you don't want to be constantly cleaning glue out of all those little crevices. Be patient, have everything ready on the table. Some people choose to put a screw in at each end to hold it into register, or a dowel. I don't, I use my pyramid marks. Now while that's drying, we can concentrate on the cap iron and the blade. So you can see I've cut it down with a hacksaw to a more manageable size, filed off the edges so it's nice and comfortable. Look at that lovely old steel. This is an important part. We'll need to hone the chip limiter. So you can see it's sprung, it sits in, and it's slightly back cut on an angle so it just catches the shavings well. When we've done that, everything's dry, we're going to put it in a vise upside down, and we're going to use a nice tuned jack plane like the one I've got here. And you can see we're just going to take a whisper of shaving, and we're doing that gently because we've got the cutter and the cap iron and the wedge all in tension, but it's just set back a little bit so we don't damage the jack plane or the nice cutter we're working on. And I'm just working on opening that throat up. So like I said, it's only 1 millimetre, so you can see how thin these shavings must be, that I'm just gently going down towards that throat. I don't want to open the throat too much. If I do, I'll never be able to have a nice fine shaving. So you just take your time with this bit. Be careful you don't plane too much on one side or the other. Take it out regularly, check it for squareness. Make sure you're not planing too much off the front or the back. It's really important. Take your time with it. And here, hopefully you'll be able to see, there's a blade in tension, as you can see, so I'm going to have to tap it to release it. And then I'm going to reset it back to where it should be. So remember, when I was doing the planing, it was set back a little bit. Now I'm setting it into the throat, and you can start to see it's there. I haven't got a line yet, so I just want to see a whisker of daylight all the way through there, nice and even. When I've done that, see, here's our little system again. And I've noticed how that little bird's mouth cross piece is holding that piece in square. So if you haven't got an end vise, this is a really good solution, which I like to use. There we go. So we've got it set to a polishing mode here. We're just tuning the plane at the moment. There's a little bit of adjustment needed. But look at that. Now this will only cut well like this if the blade is tuned to the cap iron and that's all nicely tuned to the throat of the blade. So how do you get a flat blade that's razor sharp? Well, I'm going to discuss that in another video, so tune in for that in the next couple of weeks. Now look at that. We've got lovely fine shavings that we're producing, comparing them with a thicker shaving, but you can see that's the sort of gap we're looking for. We're looking for a very, very fine gap that's nice and even. It's nice and square. It doesn't actually look square in that picture, so I got a square on it just to make sure after I looked at this, and yeah, it's nice and square to the sides. And you want the top to be level as well, because that can help you. A little pressure to the left, a little pressure to the right, and you can really feel when you're cutting straight. I also just want to spend a minute and just show you the shaping. You've got to get the shape right to your hands. So you can see what I'm doing here is just chamfering the edges off. So it's not, I haven't got any sharp edges. It feels nice to the hand, feels nice to the touch. That's my left hand will rest naturally on the top. And you can see there's that space at the back and that curve shape where my right hand will want to sit. Maybe sometimes my right hand wants to creep over onto the top of the plane. That's okay. Again, to do shavings like this with a spoke shave in a wood-like horn beam, which is so hard, you need to have tuned your tools. It needs to be a razor sharp edge on that. And that way, when you do get your little chamfers, they're going to be polished. You're not going to need to get sandpaper on them afterwards. They're going to look right. Look the part. There we go. I'm just gently working the shape of the plane to suit my hands. Notice the bandsaw marks where I rough sawn it on the bandsaw, that's where I did use it. Now here we go, this is Letty. This is her first time using a plane. Now look how easy it is to work. That's what we're looking for from a plane. Whatever plane, whether it's a metal plane or a wood plane, it should be a joy to use. So if your plane's not a joy to use like that, look, I mean there's no effort there that Letty was putting in, then you've got to start to rethinking about tuning it up. So the shape, if you've got keen eyes, you might notice it's a little wider at the back here than it will be in the next pictures. And that's as I started to use it. It wasn't quite sitting right for my rear hand, so I just adjusted the back of the plane a little. I've used an oil to finish it here. When you finish your plane, make sure you finish all the sides of it, including the bottom. And the reason for that is if you don't, it won't dry evenly. So then you will be constantly playing around with flattening the sole. If you don't have a jack plane like the one I had, use a plate glass with a piece of belt sandpaper on it, and that will work just fine as well. So I hope you've enjoyed watching this video. Please subscribe, like the video if you enjoyed it. Feel free to ask any questions in the comments bar below.